this entire thing is that everyone's online studios are evolving and changing. And
Yeah, I
my
mean,
whole,
I had a little one to go, but now as more I'm doing more and more and more, and find the need for multiple cameras and different stuff and better audio and be able to edit some stuff. It's
yeah.
I'm definitely building a small little studio.
So we are live.
Yeah, everything. So what's going to go is that right now we're not
Everyone's online studios
we're
are
live.
evolving.
Let me just change this up. Check. Cool. All right, so that's live. Good. Now it's 7 o'clock. How much more time you need?
I just will need like 30 seconds, but nothing. I can't get into my Facebook or my husband's thing, so I'm just looking for that Zoom link.
Oh, you want me to send it? I can tell you what the numbers are if you want.
Yeah.
We're live, guys.
Oh, don't do that.
Just on YouTube, not in the Zoom yet, but we're gonna have to go in. You want to just kill your video right now, Jessica, and come back in when you're live? You can hit the stop video.
Sure.
Little camera icon. There we go.
There,
All right, I'm gonna open up the room. It's you
All
and me
right.
now. It's you and me, Jamie. You and me.
It's just the two of us against the world.
Well, we're now live, and I want to welcome everybody to another open talk. We're going to let the room fill up just for a second here, and we will get started in just a moment.
Wonderful.
Well, good evening. Welcome to Open Talk. This is actually episode 13, which I'm going to say is lucky episode 13 because there's enough going on in this world right now that's just craziness. We took a pause from the whole world for COVID, and now we're taking a pause and being distracted by protests and mass, how do you, it's like cue the volcanoes next. What is going to happen next? Like you can't possibly imagine that the world would go this crazy in a matter of months and weeks and stuff like that. But just like everything else, everything's pivoting and changing. So I had two guests lined up for tonight, and one is out on the streets, Evelyn, Hockstein, who will probably dial in while we're doing this. But I want to welcome our one guest that's here, and we also have another call-in, another guest that's going to join us, Jessica, and it's a journalist episode. We're going to talk about what's going on in the world right now. So a lot of times we have commercial photographers, we have wedding photographers, we have everybody from the industry. So this week is going to be really kind of focused on you guys. So I want to welcome Jamie and say hello to everybody. You're live, Jamie. Say hi.
Hi, Travis. How are you? How's New York these days?
New York is all right. I mean, it's a crazy, I mean, you always think of New York as sort of one of the center of the world spots, but with COVID as a hot spot, and now with protests and stuff like that, it really is an ongoing. It's kind of it's crazy. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. So first of all, introduce yourself and tell everybody where you're from.
My name is Jamie Rose. I am the co-owner of Momenta, which operates Momenta Workshops, which is what most photojournalists know us for. And I'm calling in from beautiful Redmond, Oregon.
Awesome. And now we have Jessica. Jessica, why don't you say hi, introduce everybody to yourself. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know how busy you've been with all the stuff that's going on.
No problem. My name is Jessica Kasilniak. I'm a Washington, D.C. based video journalist. I'm the senior video journalist at McClatchy here in D.C.
So you just woke up, you've been out on the streets for the last 17, days straight, right?
It seems like it. Definitely seems like 17 days has passed.
Since Monday.
What's the mood in Washington right now?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
What's the other overall mood that you have as a journalist in Washington right now? Especially these last couple of days.
Yeah, I think I think now today things are, you can really feel a shift in the air. I think the weekend was really tough for everybody. As of today, the military has like pulled back into Lafayette Park, and so they're not visible on the streets. At least that's as last time I checked. But they have been, very visible, very present. And they have, on Monday they forced peaceful protesters down the street using tear gas and force. So it's been a really, really tough few days here. But the mood seems to be shifting. It seems to be more peaceful. So I think everyone is hoping that the next few nights and the weekends continues to be peaceful.
Yeah. And Jamie, how are you doing? How's your mood, and how's it on your side of the world?
I think I'm like everyone else right now. I feel a little shell shocked by what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. My heart is just bleeding for the photojournalists that I know who have been going through some really difficult time, in this coverage. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the program.
Yeah, we're going to definitely dive into that very deeply a little later on.
And at the same time, I mean, it's kind of my MO, but I am very optimistic. I think that we are going to see some real discussions coming out of this that we haven't seen in a while and we haven't really talked about. And well, I think it's so unfortunate that there's been so much violence that has detracted from the main message. I think we're going to be talking about some really important issues. I think we're going to be talking about inclusivity and diversity, but also, what does it mean to have a free press?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to have the ability of journalists to freely cover the news and not be obstructed because of, the many reasons that we'll talk about later. So yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of conversations that are going to be very relevant. And I think there's a lot of organizations that are going to prove to be really impressive voices for that discussion.
So I want to kind of just jump back and rewind prior to all of this so we can kind of get a little premise of where you guys came from. And we'll start with you, Jamie. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Kent, Ohio, where Kent State is.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in kind of a really cool university town and raised by photographers and teachers. So I have sort of a artistic.
So photography was in the blood from the get-go?
Not from the get-go. It wasn't like, I wasn't one of those people who was like, I picked up a camera when I was 4 years old. I had photography around me all the time. And there was a dark room in our basement when we were growing up and all that good stuff. But I think more than anything, my parents really wanted to focus on the arts. And so they made it very clear that part of a good, well-rounded education is really focused on arts and humanities. And at the same time, journalism was always part of that. It was always, there was always the news on at night and things like that. So I think so that's in my blood for sure.
Did you know and kind of your path was originally photography, or was it something completely different? You were on a completely different path and found photography?
No, I always knew I wanted to be in journalism. I didn't really know. I mean, obviously in high school, I didn't really know what like documentary was. I didn't understand what the difference between documentary and photojournalism was, and photography and, magazine versus editorial versus all the other things you learn later on. But I joined the school paper. That was kind of my like first jaunt into journalism. And I had really great, amazing teachers, and we had an award-winning high school journalism staff. So that was kind of cool. And then I went on to college, and I thought I wanted to be a writer because I kind of didn't know that like the photography part of it was more than just fun. And then I got an internship, and then I went to Syracuse, and I really, that's where I really found my legs. And I had, incredible mentors with Mark Dolan and David Sutherland, who beat the drum of the importance of the Fourth Estate and documentary coverage, and being able to be a really qualified storyteller with a camera. Yeah. So that was where like the path opened up to me, and then I was really lucky. I graduated from school and I went to DC.
How about you, Jessica? Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Northwest Indiana, about 20 minutes from Gary, Indiana, about 45 minutes from Chicago. And I, I, for most of my life, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a trauma surgeon. And my dad is a physician, and he would always, he like Jamie, he would always just introduce us to the arts. And it was really important, that he did that. And it's interesting because I was gonna go to college. I was gonna go to Purdue, and maybe play golf. I was a big golfer when I was in high school.
Is that right?
Yep.
Wow.
And the short story of a very long story is I got in a really bad car accident when I was 18, and couldn't play. And so my dad was in the hospital. He brought me a camera, and it was like time to go be a photographer, right? I think they wanted me to be a wedding photographer, to be fair. I think they were like, you are going to be the best wedding photographer there is. And I had already gotten into the Corcoran College of Art and Design, which is now part of GW. And so I came out to Washington, and some of my teachers were the best photographers, in town. Steve Crowley was one of my professors. Susan Sterner was one of my professors. I had amazing mentors in Jamie, and lots of colleagues, that still like live and work here. So it was, it was kind of amazing to be here. And that's kind of how I got started.
Do you remember your very first camera?
Yeah, so the very first camera I owned was like it was a D100, which is like the one of the first digital cameras. So like when you hear a lot of I own, like my dad, I think it was like an N something that my dad owned that I would play with, but the camera my dad bought me that was mine was a D100, which I find so funny because everyone always talks about like their first camera and it's some old film camera and it's like, this relic, and I'm like, oh, the first one I had was a digital camera. So yeah.
And Jamie, do you remember your first camera?
Yeah, when I joined the newspaper staff, my dad gave me the AE1, Canon AE1. Yes, it was during the time of film, Jessica. and that was the first one. What was yours?
My very first camera, I had a 110. And this was long before I ever thought I was going to be a 110, a little disposable 110. Yeah,
That's fun.
Yeah. And then I went through all kinds of different cameras, from Kodak disc cameras to ELPH cameras to, I think my first real camera, my mom had a Nikon FE2, and I started shooting on that when I was at NYU, and I took my very first photo class, and that was I was there for film, and I thought I would have an Oscar by 22 or something like that, and I figured if I couldn't take a single picture, how was I going to take a whole film, and make a whole movie? So I took the very first class I took at NYU was a film class, and learning how to develop black and white, and I realized right there I'm not a film photographer, and it was too frustrating in the dark room. If it wasn't for digital photography, I probably wouldn't have been a photographer at all. So
I actually really sympathize with you. I really sympathize with you.
To be even more honest, if it wasn't for the Control Z, it definitely wouldn't be a photographer. Especially in Photoshop and Lightroom. Control Z is my best friend. So when you were growing up, what were some of your influences? Because I know when I was growing up, even before, I loved film and TV and stuff like that. But even before I was a photographer, I looked towards like cinematographers. So I wasn't looking at journalists. I wasn't looking at, famous photographers. For me, it was actually cinematographers. I loved the whole atmosphere of cinema and that kind of thing. Did you have early on influences that kind of guided you? We'll start with you, Jessica.
I think, honestly, like outside of your traditional like photo books, I remember like when there used to be stand-up Barnes and Nobles. Like my dad would always take us to Barnes and Noble and bookstores, and I always used to like sit in the photo section while my dad did his thing and just like look at books, and I'd always like ask him to like get one, can I get this one or can I get that one, and none of them were particularly like earth-shatteringly like amazing books, but the one that I still have and I still like chuckle about is like The Day in the Life of Africa. Like I still have like, I just remember like looking at that book and really like just thinking like, oh, this is something I want to do. And then eventually like obviously growing my knowledge as a, you know, as someone that was learning about photography, to like Henry Cartier-Bresson and you know, Susan Meisel and you know, so, and Pablo Pellegrin, like I think I always, and I think that's where I learned my foundation, but no one in my family was photographers. So it was really like up to me and the Barnes and Noble, you know, when I was in high school to like kind of like get that foundation. So I ended up learning a lot when I ended up getting to college.
Yeah.
And I think that's where my foundation really kind of evolved.
How about you, Jamie?
Well, I vividly remember my parents had The Joy of Photography. Do you remember that book that came out in like
My mom had the joy of
1970?
cooking, but
I think it's not on this bookshelf, but I think I have it somewhere still. Like it's this like disco layout from like, it was probably like Time Life books, you know, one of those many, many things. And then there was there was another Kodak book that I like, of the books I remember. But
yeah,
I think
I have to interrupt you here just because, you know, I was raised by extremely strong like women in my life and influenced by women. And right now, because I said that comment, my mom had the joy of cooking, which actually was just a joke. My dad had the joy of cooking. I have to clarify that my mother was a kick-ass woman. She will probably see this, and she was a big influence on me in the arts. So I'm going to wipe that last comment. Resume.
oh, I wasn't even taking that as a microaggression. I just thought like, sure.
No, I'm just
Every household had that book.
exactly.
I think one of the things that was one of the best things my parents ever did was my mom subscribed to the New Yorker when I was growing up. And so we always had that around, which is crazy because I was in this like tiny little town in Ohio and I'd never been to New York before, but like the writing and the photography and the cartoons and the commentary that was in that magazine was so eye-opening to someone who's from a town in, you know, central Ohio, northwest Ohio, like it was such an eye-opening thing. So I feel like periodicals in general should be something that every parent has laying around.
Those old National Geographics, right? Like,
yes. Just there so that like curious kids can pluck something off of a bookshelf and just start flipping through it and find what interests them, whether it's, you know, arts or photography or science or whatever.
Yeah, our parents definitely have them. And my mom is like, can we get rid of these yet? And I'm like throwing my body in front of them. Like, oh, no, get rid of them.
So important.
So both you guys took a very direct kind of, or was it direct? You guys chose to be journalists, basically. It's certainly part of your career, which is a very different type of photographer than, you know, say what I do is, you know, portraits or commercial or playing, you know, with Photoshop and creating an image and being able to alter it and do all kinds of different things. How did you kind of choose that path and what, you know, what do you think it is that makes someone a journalist opposed to, you know, a photographer that's sort of like, you know, at the whim of whatever they want to do?
Jamie, do you want to go? I mean, I can answer it.
Yeah. Both. Hopefully, both.
You know, I love being, like Jamie will agree with this. Like, I love being in the know. I love having that first, you know, seat to history. And there's just something about it that really fuels me. I think that it's really important, like as I have evolved from a photojournalist to a video journalist, I think being a storyteller and being able to find the thing that really connects is really important to me, and I think that's why I chose this, is because I chose it as the way that I wanted to communicate with the world.
Yeah. How about you, Jamie?
Well, I genuinely don't have the patience that you do, Travis, to sit in front of a computer for that long. And I'm not that good at Photoshop, so.
Painstaking hours.
I think I've always had, an activism streak in me, especially because of my parents. And, I vividly remember as a kid, like marching against nuclear weapons during the Cold War, and
Yeah.
and being a part of social activism. So that's always been really important to me. And I mean, I'm very thankful, like, just to speak from a female perspective. Like, I thought originally I wanted to be Annie Leibovitz because the really high-end photography that I had seen was through fashion magazines as a young girl, because that's just kind of what's forced on you, and encouraged to like look at these pretty pictures of portraits and things like that. So like that's what I thought I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand that there was a connection between activism and social and humanitarian issues and photography. But once I figured that out, then I was like, oh, I am all in, chips in, like all in. I want to do that. I want to be able to tell that kind of a story. And
Right.
And politics was just something that I really enjoyed, but humanitarian work was what I really wanted to do. I mean, I always loved doing politics, but I always kind of said it like I get to photograph like policy, and then policy in action. And it's definitely gives you two sides of the coin when you realize like how complicated it is to make policy, and then how complicated it is to enact it when you're on the ground with other people.
Do you think it was sort of ingrained right from the very early? Because when you bring that up, for me, like when I was growing up, I loved fantasy. I loved space. I loved, documentary stuff was like, I didn't want to watch it. If it was black and white, if it was, the news or something like that, I didn't watch it, which is totally flipped now. I love documentaries and can't get enough of, black and white films and stuff like that. But for me early on, I was a fantasy escapist. And I think that's why when I'm a photographer, I think of these grand images and what can I do and kind of create these wonderful worlds that were in my head and make them reality. What was that for you growing up? Was like, were you into like news? Were you into documentaries, or no, it just was a flight of fancy for you?
Well, my mom was very strict about television. We were only allowed to watch 2 hours of television a week, each girl. So we would have to like find compromise with each other. And like to this day, I still remember that I liked Fantasy Island and the Dukes of Hazzard, and my sister wanted to watch like St. Elsewhere. And so like, I remember time periods based on the TV shows that we would watch during our 2 hours. But I always really liked to read. I was dyslexic when I was in first grade. My mother was told that.
I'm dyslexic too.
Yeah, I'm actually dyslexic as well. So we're all
Einstein, Da Vinci, Edison, Rockefeller, we're in good company.
Oh yeah. So my mom sat me down when I was in first grade and said, your brain doesn't work the way other people's brains do. And the only way you're going to learn how to read, because I loved it when she would read me stories. And she said, the only way you're going to learn how is if you teach yourself, because your school just doesn't understand how to do that. And so the second, like I trained my brain to read in the right way, like I couldn't stop reading books. So I escaped.
Here's a crazy point on that. The reading aspect is the average person wants to take maybe 5 to 10 like objects or letters in a second, roughly saying something like that, where the dyslexic wants to take the whole page in or 100 images in at a second. So we have when reading, we want to take that whole page in as a picture, opposed to now we have to literally go to the letter and follow it across and trace in. So we're trying to take in everything at once. So when it comes to like putting puzzles together or being creative or something like that, in our brain, it's already done. But when it comes to actually focusing on a pinpoint spot and translating it across, it's much harder because we're trying to take in so much information at once.
That makes so
once
much
you
sense.
realize that, it really kind of
so
changes
much sense.
Things.
Yeah. That's why I hate QuickBooks, I think. So I think everybody, I mean, Jessica, like I escaped in books. So like I would read just constantly, but I loved movies for that storytelling aspect. So I think because I wasn't watching like serial television as a kid, my vision and fantasy world or whatever was like a story as a complete cohesive project. And maybe that's Travis, I'm totally like going to think about this for days now.
I can go much deeper into it actually, because I've actually gone and talked about it, and it's the problem is people tell you it's a learning disability when actually it's not. Most dyslexics have a much higher IQ, and we learn differently, and it's all the way we process audio and visual, and it's pretty wild, and
That's really interesting.
it's something that unfortunately the education systems don't know how to deal with it. Like when I was in school, they would say, oh, he's just lazy, or he's not performing, and that's not the case at all. It's like if they actually sat me down and forced me to take notes, I was never listening to the next thing they said. And once I said, just don't, I can't take notes, don't let me do it, then I remembered everything. And they're like, wait, how did that happen? So they don't understand. And the first thing they think is, oh, you see letters backwards. I'm like, no, I don't see letters backwards.
It's kind of funny. Even my editor now, like when I'm about to put out a piece, like I will make him like look at it and be like, I need you to edit this. And he's like, it's fine. I'm like, no, there's probably something wrong with it. And I finally have gotten comfortable. He knows I'm dyslexic. He knows, he makes time for it, because otherwise, he's like, oh, there's a mistake. And I'm like, no, I looked at it 100 times. He's like, I promise you, like, you have to go fix it. But yeah, no, it's kind of crazy.
So as all of my guests, I asked to send in some work and stuff like that. So Jamie, yours is queued up first. So I'm going to jump into your work here. And
Sure.
as we go to different images, I would like to talk about them and stuff like that. So here we're going to go with the very first thing. As soon as you can see the screen, let me know. Can you see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And we're going to go into the first image here. Boom. Okay.
So you want me to talk about it?
Of course I do. Because I don't know. Yeah, it's your image. I can talk about it, but you can tell me the truth about it.
So that was this was from my very first experience going out of the country and doing humanitarian work for my thesis. I was working with volunteer healthcare providers in the West Bank and Israel, and just like I think we all have these preconceived notions of like what our path is going to be like. I totally thought like, I want to be Carolyn Cole. I want to be Andrea Bruce. I'm going to be James Nachtwey. I'm going to go cover conflict. And like the first time I even got anywhere near it, I was so terrified I couldn't work. And I realized like, this is not for me. But what I did want to do is I wanted to tell stories about humanitarian healthcare workers. That was really my passion. And so
can I back you up just one quick second?
Yeah.
How do we get from did you go to college for this, and how did you go? What was your route to finding your first job and getting to there?
Oh, okay. Well, I went to undergrad at American University in Washington, D.C. And I majored in literature because I thought I wanted to be a writer, and then photography, like I would be that like one-man band of doing photo and writing and all of that. And then I had an internship at my local paper, which I always tell people is like the one thing you should definitely do as a photojournalist is go work for local news, because it really does change your entire perspective on being a member of the community and the impact that you have on, people that you're going to see again. And then I went to graduate school. I applied to a number of different schools, and then I went to Syracuse, and I discovered their photojournalism program there. And at that time, there were so many incredible photographers coming out of it. And I had so many great influences, and I really wanted to work with doing some kind of work. And so Mark Dolan was actually one of the first people that introduced me to grant writing and why grant writing was so important for personal art projects and personal photojournalism projects. And so I started writing grants. And I started to apply for things and, see if I could partially or fully fund my thesis that I wanted to do overseas. And so I was listening to a story on NPR. This is why Jessica's father and I think get along so well is I was listening to the story on NPR, and they were talking about these physicians who were volunteering in the Philippines to vaccinate babies, and they were kidnapped by a militant group and being held hostage, and one of them had been killed. And I was so morally outraged by it. And I was like, of all the people, you're going to take the doctors who were like taking their only vacation time to go off and vaccinate babies. And so I just decided that was something that I was really interested in covering and supporting that story. So I found this group, Physicians for Human Rights, they were Israeli doctors that were going in and helping to support Palestinian medical relief and doctors in the field. And so this gentleman and I were going to visit a family that were living in an occupied house and checking on the kids and everything like that. So it was a really enlightening experience. It really changed my path. And then I had to go find a job. So this is my one tip to all the people that are probably, feeling really, really despondent right now, the young kids who are graduating. I applied for, I think the count was finally 35 jobs when I graduated from grad school. And one of them was to load film at a newspaper. That's all you did. The photographers come in, hand you film, and you load it into the processor all day long. No shooting, no creativity. You were basically a robot. And I didn't even get that job. So I just want everybody to know that it's always been hard. It's always been competitive. It always sometimes feels like everything's, collapsing. But then I moved to Washington, D.C. and I figured out through amazing mentors like John Harrington and Nikki Kahn and Linda Epstein, who just all took me under their wing and said, you got the drive. Now you just got to figure out how to get the access. And so they taught me how to get my press credentials and how to start, getting myself out there. And then I, thankfully, I went to an NPPA Northern Short course and I was showing my portfolio and I met the lead political editor for the New York Times. And he said, how come you haven't been shooting for us? And here's another tip. At the time, they had just changed their contract and everyone was all up in arms. And I think this is incredibly relevant today to what we are all talking about. Everyone was furious. And there was this boycott the New York Times, and people were straight up bullying anyone who was signing that contract. People, thank God Facebook wasn't really that big back then, but people were talking around each other's backs and just being genuinely hateful to some of the people. They're calling them scabs, they were crossing a line. And so I said, I'm really nervous to sign the contract because I hear it's really bad for freelancers. And Kevin sat me down and went line by line with the contract to explain to me what it was, how it would affect my business, what it would do, what the resale rights were, everything like that. And it was really enlightening, so that when somebody, accused me of that, I was able to be educated enough to say hey, yeah, I signed it. And this is why. And I've made a lot of money on the resale, so it wasn't that bad. So I got to be in the halls of Congress and work with the most, amazing photographers like Doug Mills and Stephen Crawley.
When was the first time you actually felt wow, I'm a legit photographer now? When did you pass that kind of that realization? You're standing in front of it was because standing in the room as a president with the president, I remember shooting Bill Clinton. I'm like, holy crap, I got Bill Clinton in front of me and I'm shooting him and talking to him. That's there's a certain feeling that's wow, I arrived.
I don't know. I think for the first couple of years, I don't know, Jessica, did you feel this way? I've definitely felt like an imposter. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just going to act like I do.
Well, I feel that way all the time still sometimes.
All the time.
Come on.
All the time. I have no idea what I'm doing.
I remember
I just keep making it better and better and better. It's I get better, but I pretend I'm even better than I am to become that way. So I catch up, and then I need to get better and better.
Fake it until you make it. Fake it until you make it.
That was one of the best advice my stepfather told me is I never accepted a job I was qualified for. I took the job and then I learned how to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can you do it? Absolutely. Thank God for Google.
And YouTube.
I think, the handful of times where I felt like I knew what I was doing was because somebody else explained it to me. Matthew Kavanaugh was an editor and he helped me, the first time I shot at the White House for a Marine One landing, and I didn't know what I was doing. And he just, this is sure, he won't appreciate me saying this, but he was just expose for the fireball. And other than that, make as many pictures on Motor Drive as you can. It's pretty straightforward. And then the first time I went into the Oval, I remember Mary Calvert was standing next to me, and she knew that I was completely out of water. I had no idea what I was doing. I was terrified. And I was on like New York Times rotation that day because there was some bill signing or something like that. And they did like 3 of them in a row and I didn't know what I was doing and I was terrified. And she looked down and she said, "What's your camera set at?" And I can't remember what I had. It was like 60th of a second, at like F8 and be there. And she's like, "No, go to manual, do it this way, put it on there, go." And
wow. So we're going to go into, I think, a couple different images here in just a second. And going from politics to scenes like this is a very different type of photography. Covering politics is one thing, and there's certainly enough body strewn around there, but this is different. And explain how.
So I had wanted to do more humanitarian work, and thankfully Jessica and I were talking about networking ahead of time. I had my boyfriend at the time was a photo editor, and he'd heard about this call for jobs, applications and proposals to apply for the Global Fund. And so I did. And it was pretty incredible. I was on a team of 12 people. There were 6 Magnum photographers and then these 6 unknown photographers like me. Truly, because we were cheaper, and I was able to go and do work on AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. So I covered tuberculosis in Bolivia, and then I went to Uganda and I covered the malaria. Well, I was covering AIDS, but as this photo shows, and what we talk about in Momenta workshops when you're doing humanitarian work is you really need to, show like the whole story. You have to show that there are tons of people being affected by this, tons of ages, it's not just one person, one thing. And so I was really blessed. I got to.
So you mentioned really Momenta, awesome. And I know a lot of people may not know what that is. Why don't you explain quickly Momenta?
Sure. When in 2008, Momenta Workshops was started by John Christopher Anderson. He was working as photo editor at the time, and I was working as a freelancer. And there was another photographer who was instrumental in the beginning. He was a documentary photographer out of New York, and we all got together. And Chris had this vision for a company that had multiple divisions that would focus on training and supporting documentary photographers. And so we really, we started with our very first workshop in Burma, actually 4 months after the monsoons that were so devastating, or typhoon. And then we went and covered, Uganda, and we just kind of rolled right out into doing trainings and programs for humanitarian and documentary photographers and photojournalists who really wanted to get that real world experience of working with a nonprofit for an important humanitarian story, like Jessica Kasalniak, who was one of the very first students of ours very early on in the first couple of years. She went to India and she covered a leper colony and people who were working to help people suffering from leprosy. And so we've been doing this for 12 years. It's pretty incredible.
So you've been doing it for 12 years and the basis of those 12 years was very hands-on. So how are you adapting now to, suddenly like we're in quarantine and, isolation? How are you adapting the workshops now to kind of deal with all of this?
Well, we have online programs. Our one-day workshops have gone online. So we have a Get Funded seminar, and then we also have which is all about fundraising for personal projects. So that's really focused on like, how do you get that dream project of yours to get outside money? So we talk about personal, private, and public funds like grant writing and crowdfunding and all soup to nuts. And then at the end of the month, our first cohorts of online mentorship programs are going to launch. So that's going to be a really intensive 1 mentor, 5 people. We decided to take the best things about Momenta workshops, which is creating community. So you're going to be with 5 other people. You're all going to be focused on the same topic, but you still get one-on-one editing. So part of our programs are really based in the concept of photojournalism, like what Jessica was just talking about. Like, I have to go to an editor and say, I want, I need that editorial experience. I need to be able to like talk to somebody about my work. And so every day on our in-person workshops, you get 1 hour at least of one-on-one editing with a coach or a mentor. And then,
and sometimes it's brutal.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Jessica. I wear pussycats.
So Jessica, having finished working with Momentum, what was it like for you? What was your experience, and what did you pull out of it that kind of that wow, every day I take that piece of information with me as a photographer?
Um, I'm not. I don't want people to think I'm saying this just because Jamie is here,
Yeah.
but like I think Jamie and Chris probably have been the two most influential people in pushing
You're gonna
me.
make her cry, and I'm gonna
That's
cry.
lovely.
Don't cry. And pushing me in to like keep going. Like I think this industry is really hard, and there were times that I stepped out of it and was a freelancer and kind of had a little bit lost my way. And you know Chris and Jamie were both like, what's your goals, right? What do you want to do? And when you're able to really, like have that mentor that is very realistic and quite honestly hard, right? Like
Yeah.
Chris and Jamie they're realists. And if you don't, I've worked with them one-on-one on many projects, and when you're not performing your best, they're like going to tell you, right? And I think that is that honesty is the thing that propels you forward.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jess. That's very nice of you to say.
It's very true.
So when you're what gravitates you to a picture when you pick up that lens and want to hit that button to take that picture and slam that shutter down? What is, because some people it's the light, some people it's just an emotion. For you, what is it that you gravitate towards?
Well, we always talk about, like Chris always talks about, gesture and form, and then light and composition and all that. And like I'm definitely a gesture person. Like I think it's part of my personality. I like kind of go for who's ever making a lot of movement and noise and everything like that. But I think as I've gotten older and I've studied more and I've experienced the different types of technology that we have available to us right now. Like I try to follow the light a lot more these days and really, kind of waiting for that moment, which is documentary photography. I mean, you're waiting for the moment. Your whole purpose is to get really great moments. And so mine are, I kind of focus in what we do at Momenta as well. And like the next set of pictures is we're really trying to tell a story in either a single image. This is Allison Zuka's image from a group called Coach Art that is a bunch of people that do art coaching for kids in LA. So we're really looking for something that is giving you a bit more storytelling information than just a beautiful form or a beautiful light or, perfect composition. I think that's probably the hardest thing for some photographers, when they come into our programs, because they're so used to, like, wedding photographers. Everyone's gorgeous at a wedding. So it's really easy to make sure it's perfect. And then, sometimes you have to, really look for the moment. This is Charlotte Kessel's image from Hurricane Katrina recovery during one of our very first workshops ever. We've been working in New Orleans for 12 years. This is Uday. I totally mess up his last name every time. Kembakode. Maybe. Uday is incredible. This was actually in Social Documentary Network's 10-year anniversary of the Best of Gallery. And so, you're looking for those little storytelling things in the background, like Sophia, who's the most famous, one of the most famous women in Colombia, and how it's, in the lobby of a Catholic charity, which is kind of funny.
The colors are just gorgeous.
Oh, so stunning. And then this is Ken Deemer's image. And like this, there's gesture, there's form, there's light, there's all that good stuff in this, but there's also this incredibly touching moment because this was a job fair at a high school in LA. And they were you could see the guy bringing around the ties to give to the kids who didn't have a tie. And then the teacher was going around teaching them how to tie the tie and make sure they looked good so that when they had that meeting, I mean, those are the type of images that just, they make me so proud for what we're able to do. And they help nonprofits grow and tell these stories. And, a lot of times in today's news, these images just kind of, or these topics just kind of come and go. And when they're gone out of people's memories, you know, somebody just said the other day, like, COVID, what? And people are still suffering from that. Businesses and individuals and humans and doctors are still struggling. And that's where, you know, we come in. That's where we're passionate about. We want those stories to stay in the news. And whether it's LGBTQ issues or whether it's healthcare issues or, you know, after school programs and training for kids, like that's really our mission. Our mission is to support documentary photographers, no matter race, religion, creed, background, geography, anything like that. Storytellers are storytellers the world over. And we want to get those stories out there to the public.
So we're going to jump over to Jessica, and
Yes.
I want to thank everybody because
Go, Jess.
you weren't originally scheduled to be here tonight. Evelyn Hockstein, who you also know and is in DC with you, was supposed to be on tonight, and she's also a friend and a co-host of Around the Lens, which we both do together with David. And she is out there on the streets tonight, and it couldn't make it because I think there's something going on in Washington in the last week. I don't know what, but you do, because you've been out there on the streets and photographing. So I want to share what you've gone into, but how did you go from what was your transition into your first job, and how did you get there? You're still muted.
Still muted. I am still, so when I graduated college, my I had an opportunity to either stay in DC or go work for my local paper. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do because I thought, I thought you needed to be in DC, right? Like the best photographers are working in New York and DC. And I, talked to my professor about it, and she was the one that encouraged me to leave. She said, you're not going to learn how to be a photographer in DC. Like the people that are working successful in DC, they've been somewhere else. If you look at the best photographers around the country, like they don't start in New York and they don't start in DC. A lot of them started in small towns and small papers, around the country. And so she said, you could always come back to DC, but you can't, but you need to go learn how to, like, I taught you how to be a photographer. Now you need to go learn how to be a photographer. And so I left DC and started at our local paper at the Northwest Indiana Times. It was in Munster, Indiana, which is the Northwest Indiana region of Chicago. And there's a lot happening in Northwest Indiana. I swear anything bad that happens, like the person is like related to the region in some way, shape, or form. And it's really shocking, but it was a great place to work. And so that's kind of where I started, and I worked there for 3 years, and then I left and became a freelancer for a few years. And then I was married at the time, and I got a divorce. And this is when I started working with Chris and Jamie a little more. They said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to work for one of the biggest papers in the country. And I'll never forget being on the phone with Chris. And Chris is like, that's like almost impossible, right? And I was like, yeah, I mean, probably, but like, that's what I want to do. And he's like, papers are like downsizing, and you want to like get off the bench and like go work at a paper. And I was like, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. So I actually moved back to Chicago. And about 6 months later, I joined the staff of the Chicago Sun-Times, and started working there. Worked there for 3 years. I was the lone survivor. A lot of people don't know this, of when they laid everyone off in Chicago.
I have to just say one quick thing. The reason why Chris does that, and the reason why like this happens a lot, is because a lot of people say like, I want to go work for National Geographic, and then he's like, are you sure? And then when she said, I'm sure, then he was like, let's do this, because just wanted to make sure that you were there and ready to go. But when you did, oh my God, that girl's like a dog with a bone. So please go ahead.
So I started working at the Chicago Sun-Times, and my focus was the south and west sides of Chicago, gang violence, gun violence, and then a lot of Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods. I was the lone survivor of the Sun Times layoff. It's actually the day I became a video journalist.
Oh, wow.
When they laid everybody off, I was the only one on staff at the time who knew how to do video. And they said, today you're going to be a video journalist. And they're like, you know what you're doing, right? And I'm like, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I had just, it's kind of crazy because I had just gone through a pretty like terrible year because I had gotten this divorce. And I had just like gotten on my feet again and like gotten a place in the city and like was really like felt like I had gotten my life back under control. And they're like, you can leave, you know, you're welcome to quit, or you can be a video journalist. And I was like, oh my God, I have rent to pay. Like, I definitely want to like stick it to the company, but like, how am I going to pay my rent?
Yeah.
So it was so during that time, I just decided to put my head down. Like, there was a lot of noise. There was a lot of phone calls, a lot of noise about what had happened. And I certainly thought what the company did was really terrible and incredibly awful to legendary photographers that had worked there. But I had to put my head down because I needed a job. So I
did you work with, I know, Alex Garcia?
Alex works at the Tribune.
Oh, that's
so,
right.
But I do, yeah, but I do know Alex.
All you Chicago people know each other, don't you?
Yeah, we do. we're just competitors at heart.
So I'm going to go into the first image that you sent me here, and why don't you tell me when this was taken and some information about it?
So we're just going to jump right to present day.
Yeah.
I forgot this one was first. So I took this picture. I took this picture on Saturday, actually. This was actually for me on Saturday when the protesting like got really violent in Washington, D.C. In this photo, like you can see the smoke from these smoke bombs, but like they were shooting tear gas, they were shooting pepper spray rounds, they were shooting these like 68 caliber pepper spray impact rubber bullets at people. One hit somebody and then didn't explode and then like hit me. And I actually had it outside. I actually still have it because I was like, what is this? Then I learned it was a pepper spray round and I put it outside.
Yeah, kitty. No.
Right, exactly. But there was like this is just after some cars had exploded and a news truck had exploded and there were fireworks going off. And so this is it felt really unsafe in this moment. So I actually found a way to tuck myself behind the police, get a little higher, and I was able to watch the scene unfold.
So since we're talking about this right now, and normally I would leave it till after the slides, but since we have these images up, and both of you are journalists, America for the first time over the last year or two has now been put on the list as a warning list for journalists as being a problematic or dangerous place for photographers, which is something that we've not ever been on. And out there, as a viewer, I am seeing images of these journalists getting hit, almost look like they're getting targeted, and every other moment you see that it's changed. So what do you think has changed? How has it changed? And where do you think the direction of this is coming from?
I think,
and I want to hear from both of you on this.
Yeah, I think that's it's a hard question to answer because I think some of the stuff I think is intentional in the fact that like if police are going to fire on a crowd of protesters, like, and we can argue for days on whether they should do that or not, like some of that is like part of the job, right? You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. There are these reports that they're getting fired on, and knowing, like we've heard like the Carolyn Cole story, you know, there's plenty of stories about people being pursued and fired upon. And you know, people are getting mugged. I've had I know 4 people who have been mugged now since Saturday. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think the rhetoric that has come from this administration is put a target on the media's back. Certainly what he has said has not helped. I think, but I do think we're talking about three different lanes, right?
Yeah.
And I think the looting that is happening is if people are going to loot a store, right, or a CVS, and they see somebody with thousands of dollars of camera equipment, like, yeah, it makes sense that they would mug you too. Like, it's like no holds bar, right? Like
Right.
when we saw people looting is when my husband and I, who's also a freelance photographer here, we were in our car, and we wanted to make sure that we wanted to capture that because we thought it was important, but we also wanted an easy way out. And so I think these three lanes have three different problems.
Jamie, I want you to address this too, because I think, it's frightening that, it's one thing to be a war journalist or a journalist, and put yourself knowingly saying, I'm going to go and cover conflict zones. But when the conflict zone is in your backyard in America where it's not supposed to be, what's that like? And when you feel targeted, what's your feeling of this current climate?
Well, I'm going to throw a caveat out, which is, I'm not a working photojournalist
No, but
right now,
you know enough,
but
and you've been around it.
yeah. But having said that, Momenta's mission has always been to support and educate and create the community of documentary photographers so that they can continue unfettered access to tell the stories that need to be told. And so what we've been doing in the last week I don't know about any of you guys, but I have been texting with individual photographers every night until almost midnight, checking in with people, seeing how they're doing, how are they emotionally and physically handling this, reaching out to people who we know have been assaulted and mugged and saying, what can I do for you? What can Momenta do for you? And I think the thing that is being lost, as Jessica was really right, there's three lanes. There's the, like, you're at a political rally and somebody puts a target on your back and says, these people are, the enemy. That's different from what we're dealing with right now. And the problem is, just like what the protesters are trying so desperately to make sure is delineated, is there are looters and violent actors, and then there are protesters, and the difference between the two of them is like the difference between regular Christians and the Greensboro Baptist Church, or regular gun owners and those nut jobs that were in the Capitol building with assault rifles just to intimidate people. There is just a huge difference and nuance that needs to be said for journalists who are acting ethically and responsibly, and they should be allowed to do their job, and they should be allowed to not be targeted by looters, like Jessica said. Like, they're going to do that anyway. Those are the people who aren't there to protest because of injustice. They're there to create chaos and watch the world burn. And those are very different from the people who are targeting the journalists, and in different ways. Yeah.
I want to narrow this lane just a little bit, and this is really directed at you, Jessica, because you're out there and you've been on DC, and let's narrow it just to the police interaction to the journalists right now. And I'm seeing multiple videos of them firing when they didn't need to fire on journalists. I'm seeing videos where
it's unacceptable. I'm sorry, I'm just going to throw that out there.
No,
it's unacceptable.
I want to run deeper into this, where a policeman will go up and a journalist is on the side, clearly on the side with this, with the reporter, and the cameraman gets punched in the camera unnecessarily, and he's obviously credentialed, and and people are, what are you feeling out there, and where do you think this is coming from? Is it because they've been exposed and the videos are now being shown? Is it because of the Trumpism and the media is the enemy? Where is this? Here's all these protests about police brutality, and they're fighting it with brutality. It's how firsthand, are you experiencing this, or am I just getting the wrong impression of this?
So I wish you both and everyone that's listening could be in our house, because my husband and I are constantly talking about that, because we've gone into these situations together.
If he's there, pull him in. Just grab him and pull him over.
Yeah,
we can activate it right now.
He'll steal the show. We can't let that happen. I think there's a few things that are happening. I think I think the protesters are agitating the police. I think the police are getting frustrated. I don't think an attack on a journalist is right at all. But I will say, and I'm not, and this is not, please don't everyone email me and telling hate mail about defending the police. But there's a lot of people out there with cameras. There's a lot of protesters out there with cameras. Everyone has a camera. And so if there's fireworks going off and they're getting thrown fireworks, like I was seeing protesters throw fireworks at police, like if I can understand why some of this is a matter of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or just they're clearing the area, they're not really looking at who they're shoving out of the way or punching. I think I mean we can easily say like they need to be more careful, right? But I don't think any of the people I have seen are like labeled press across their chest either. Yes, I'm wearing a credential around my neck. I don't know if the police are seeing it. I mean, I have been shoved. I don't know if it's been intentional or not. I don't want to be shoved. I don't want my colleagues to be shoved. Again, like some of this is really hard because some of our colleagues here in DC feel like they've been targeted. I personally don't feel like I've been targeted. I feel like I've been standing in the way, right? And that's much different than like a Carolyn Cole who was attacked by the police. It's much, I think like no one has patience for anything. The police have no patience for agitators or protesting. I think we don't have patience for being pushed around because we just want to do our job.
And it certainly seems like a very lose-lose situation for them right now.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a really hard conversation to have. And I'm certainly by no means an expert. I can just speak from my experience. I was on the street on Monday when they did clear the street. And I know. Was
that for the photo op, the famous now photo op?
The famous now photo op.
What was your impression of that?
My impression is that
being there, did it feel different? Did it feel like it was
very peaceful? Like I was standing with a group of journalists. We were all talking. It was very chill. We were all like having a great time. I mean, as great of a time as you could have. It was very low stress. We were very relaxed. And then all of a sudden the police started coming out of the Vermont entrance of H Street. I think it's Vermont. And it started with the police and then it came the National Guard and they just started pushing. And no one knew what was going on because it was so peaceful. It was so peaceful. And that's when CNN reported that they heard the 3 warnings, which we've heard before they have pepper sprayed or gassed or put off smoke bombs or stun grenades. But I didn't hear it, and none of the people I was with heard it. Yeah. And I've checked twice now because none of us heard it. And so we were pushed, like where we were standing, we were pushed, and people were pushed down 8th Street. Those people were sprayed with pepper spray and tear gas and smoke bombs, and I think there was maybe some stunt grenades that were lit off. I was pushed to the left, and we just got pushed around. Eventually, they pushed us all the way back. I think we're on a big text pool, and one of the photographers that was in the White House pool had sent us a text that said Trump is going to church, and everyone on the text group was like, no way, you're lying, like why, like whatever. And he's like, we're walking there now. And we were so shocked by what had just happened that we were just sort of all standing there like dumbfounded, like what has just happened? Like someone really could have been hurt. I mean, Tassos, my husband, was knocked to the ground by it was kind of a little bit of a melee. And I just like later that night, I just thought like, wow, that was one of the situations where like someone could have really have been hurt.
Of things you've covered, does this one feel more dangerous, like on levels of like, wow, of the worst I've ever been and the least I've ever been, where does this one rank? I mean, the whole situation of covering these riots and the protests and the looting and the possible, interaction of what might happen on the streets, where does it rank for you when you're out there on a nightly level?
So I covered 2 nights in Ferguson, 2 nights in Baltimore, and what I experienced Saturday night was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It felt unpredictable by the police. It felt there was a few moments where like I didn't know where would be the safest, because there were like fireworks going off and like M80s going off behind us, and they, when they blow.
It's just so nerve-wracking. Every one
Yeah.
is just like, you just don't know, and your whole body just shakes, and it's
and there's like cars exploding on I Street, which was like, we were between H and I, and so there was cars exploding, and it was loud. It was really, really, really loud. And
I want to share a piece of video that you have here. Do you want to set it up, or should we talk about it afterwards? Just share it. Or
no, you can just share it. We can talk about it afterwards.
Let's jump into it then.
At worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry.
There we go. So this is a moment of you being out there live.
Yeah, so this is from the moment where they're clearing the streets. The police are walking up. They're walking down 16th Street toward Lafayette Park. The park had been sort of cornered off, so you had police and Secret Service in the park, and then they had flanked the other side of 16th Street, basically boxing everybody in, pushing them in, kind of down toward the park to kind of disperse them. So this is sort of like the peak moment of when it got very real and very uncomfortable. I would say this was probably the most violent part of the night.
Wow. I'm going to finish off some of the other pictures, and then we can kind of jump back into this. And I want to share some of the other ones that you sent to me, and you can tell me about them.
Yeah.
Because they're
sorry we jumped to the end.
It's an open talk. We got a clear flow that's kind of going all over the place, and it's wonderful. So
this picture is from Haiti. This is about 2 months after the earthquake. This woman was pregnant, actually, obviously. I was outside on the street outside of General Hospital in Port-au-Prince, and she rolled up in a car, and she got out. She was screaming. She could barely walk, and she like pulled up her dress that she was wearing, and the baby's head was literally like between her legs already. And I just remember that people trying to walk her to the hospital, which was in a tent outside. And I like grabbed my fixer, and I was like, and my mom was a doula at the, and so I know a little bit about maternal health. And I grabbed my fixer, and I was like, you have to tell her, like, she can't walk. Like, he's like, no, she needs to get to the hospital. I was like, that baby is gonna die if she doesn't have this baby right now. And so he ran into the hospital, and they like got someone, but she couldn't walk, and she sat on the street and delivered the baby. And eventually someone came over a few minutes later and picked it up, obviously by its feet. But yeah.
As you do.
As you do.
As you do.
Wow. And this picture is from a funeral for someone that was killed over a spades game in Chicago. Actually, the next picture is of him in the hospital. If you go to the next one, this guy, sorry, these are out of order.
No, it's okay.
This gentleman was brought into the Cook County Trauma Center you might be hearing a lot of rain. It's like storming really bad here.
That's all right.
I apologize.
No, it's all good.
Can't hear it at all.
This young man was brought into the hospital. He had been shot actually in the heart. And he was brought in, they call it 000. And so the surgeon literally actually opened his chest while the gurney was going into the shock room. They put 3 staples in his heart, got his heart beating again. But the chances of him living through that were quite slim. So they got his heart beating again, but eventually died a few minutes later. I was there when he died, obviously, and showed up at his mother's house the next day and said, I just happened to be at the hospital that night working, and I'd like to cover, your son's funeral. And so he was an active gang member, and he was killed by his best friend over a $5 spades game. And so the picture from his funeral is from about a week later. So
this is, it's a very personal kind of moment that you're photographing, and with people that all know each other in extreme circumstances. What's it like? How do you approach something like that? And normally it's like people would embed themselves in something like this, but you literally, it was the night before and picked up on it the next day and went. So how do you walk in and shoot a funeral like that and have people comfortable enough that you can get those kind of pictures and that kind of access?
So I think part of that is just being present, right? Like you being silent and being quiet and being present. The funeral picture that you saw, it was really intense, and they were like dropping like Patron over the casket, and they were at one point, like some of his close friends were like trying to get into the ground, and I just was really quiet. Like I think they actually forgot that I was there, because no one said anything. And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking like, this is probably going to be a situation where I shouldn't be in, but I'm just going to be really quiet, and I'm going to stay in one place, and I'm going to like work the scene from this 6 feet and see what I can get. And it was really funny because one of these guys in this pictures found me on Instagram later and was like, or I think he found me through work and then found me on Instagram and then was like, hey, can we get some of those photos that you took? We really like them. Is this?
Yeah, it's the culture of this suddenly becomes something that they want to share, and it's so many different levels.
But this was for them, like there's no doubt like this is the way that they were mourning, and the fact that they like trusted me enough to like let them in and stay there was really powerful. I think I had covered during my time in Chicago a lot of funerals, and I sort of knew there were some things that happened at all of them that were very similar. And once you understood like the culture behind them and really like digested it and really respected what happens at these funerals, like I think that's the key to really documenting them. But you can't just show up, right? There's just no way you can. You have to really, respect that you're a guest there and you're documenting it. And I think that's what's happening in Chicago, and what happened in Chicago years ago, and it's still happening, is a serious problem. And everyone has the right to mourn when they lose their friend. They might not mourn like me or you, but everybody has the right to mourn, and just to be able to document that was really special.
Yeah. Now you're obviously going out and shooting during a pandemic. How is that affecting you personally? How are you like gearing yourself up? How are you cleaning yourself when you come home? How are you approaching it mentally and physically? And what's the whole process like for you?
It's really interesting photographing during a pandemic, because for 2 months I didn't leave my house, and then just to like have this happen and like be like, okay, we're in it. Like now we're leaving the house and this is what we're doing. The difference is Tasso was leaving the house all the time for work, because he does, photograph at the White House. And so for me, it's a little different because I hadn't been out. So it's been a little uncomfortable, right? And I think it's important that it remains uncomfortable because that's when I think we're the most careful. And so what it looks like for me is we are wearing N95 masks on the street. I've been bringing a couple with me because I've learned that once they're sprayed with, pepper spray,
Yeah.
you're actually breathing the pepper spray in once it's on there. So the other day I was like, I just don't feel well. and then I realized like, oh, the pepper spray is all over this mask. So so N95 masks all the time. A majority of protesters in DC are wearing them, which is really, really great. And there's been a couple times where it's like you're hot and sweaty and take it off and someone will be like, do you have a mask? Like, so that's been nice, right? Gas mask. Generally there's been enough warning to put it on. A bum cap or a helmet, a climbing helmet. Also, what else do I have? Lots of water, Coke, a bottle of Coke, which is people will not, I think a lot of people go to milk of magnesia or milk for pepper spray,
Right.
but we had an ATF agent recently tell us that Coke, and I think milk is disgusting. So like,
In general?
oh yeah.
How
Oh,
are you
yeah.
from the Midwest?
I don't know. I'm also lactose intolerant, so.
Oh, all right.
But Coke, there's something in Coke that deactivates the pepper spray.
It's good for rust too, and a bunch of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, right. Makes sense. And so yeah, that's generally like the precautions I'm taking in the field.
Yeah.
And then once we get home, we are rinsing, Lysoling, immediately showering in cold water, and putting our clothes like immediately in the wash.
Doing anything extra to clean your gear, or?
My husband's been doing that for me.
That's nice.
It's good to have.
Oh,
yeah.
Tassos.
So he's been wiping it down with like we have these like alcohol like wipes. They're not like any brand name, but yeah, we kind of like come home and we lay out all of our gear on our kitchen table. It has towels over it now, so we come in, we put our gear down. One of us goes and showers and one of us cleans the gear. So we have a good system down. Now, if one of us actually went to the grocery store, we'd be in better shape, but no one's been to the grocery store in a week.
And Jamie, how is this whole, like, where were you kind of at prior to COVID? Like, what were you doing? And then suddenly, where was the transition where like, oh my God, this is not a flu. This is so different. And how did you, when and how have you kind of grasped that?
I think we're in a little bit of a different position. We've been doing our workshops and covering healthcare for a really long time. So we were actually very early on the boat. And Jessica knows this because I spoke at a conference that was like pretty much the last conference that we're going to see this year. And it was at the beginning of March, and I said, I don't want to touch anyone. I don't want to hug anyone. There's no physical contact. And Jessica was like, you're going to hug me though, right? I was like, no, dude, no. I don't want either one of us to pass it on. And so we had early on, we carry PPE with us on every workshop that we go to, just in varying levels. So we had a supply of that, which we have donated to first responders here, and we'll resupply later. And we usually take that with us. We had a workshop in February when this was just starting to come on shore, and we talked with our staff in Los Angeles and said, okay, I think we need to practice sterilization. If anyone feels sick, we need to get them to the clinics right away. And thankfully, it wasn't there wasn't anything like that, but we always take it very seriously, even if it's not, in the public eye at that point. And so we had started really paying attention to that. And I,
what's it like, just quickly, what's it like? Because you have dealt with, foreign countries and understanding, pandemics and, whether, and all that. So you have a tap into health and what's really going on. And when you're hearing this false narrative coming out of administration of like, no, it's just the flu or it's just this, it's like, what is going on in your head at that moment? And what are you saying to people?
Well, the way I described it to everybody at that conference was, I think the millennials gave us this wonderful thing of you do you. And if you don't feel comfortable doing something, and I've always felt this way in conflict photography and in protests and in any situation like that, if you don't feel comfortable and if you feel like you are genuinely threatened, you do what you need to do to get yourself out of there as quickly as possible or to protect yourself and whatever. And so if you don't, one of the things that I think is so tragic right now about the protests I've heard people say in this, like, just, the whole country's grieving in different ways. But people have been, bullying photographers who aren't going out and covering it. Because if you're not on the streets, then you're not supportive. And there are people who are physically vulnerable that, they might not want to tell you, oh yeah, by the way, I have an immunodisease that, I don't want to tell you about because it's my own personal damn business. And yet, there are these groups of photographers on some of these forums that I've seen, and they're, saying like, if you're not on the streets, if you're not documenting this, and they're still scared about COVID, that they can't do that. And I think it kind of speaks to this larger issue of you do you. Like, if you feel like it's, you're comfortable doing this, then go out and do it. If you don't feel like you're ready to go out into public yet and be in a group, then don't do it. And don't let other people force you to feel like you have to do this in order to be a part of the movement. Because I know that we have a lot more to talk about than just what's happening this week. And there's a lot of issues that are coming up that are really important, and they're important for all of the freedoms of all of the amendments. And if we don't start dialoguing, we're not going to be able to get any of those things solved. And I think that that's at the crux of when you decide to make decisions for you and how you're going to make those decisions, how you're going to use your work to make change. And what does that mean? And I don't know. I mean, I hate seeing, I know that there are two photographers who, wrote to me during COVID and said, I can't go to work and this is killing me because this is what I should be covering. And I can't because either one of them was they were a formal caregiver for their mother who was 80 years old and severely immunocompromised. And he was like, what do I do? Because everyone's saying like, this is the story of our lifetimes and we should be covering it. And, I think that we need to give them a break.
It's really funny that you bring that up, because actually my next question was to Jessica, is like, because she had said her first 2 months, she sort of isolated herself. And as a journalist and someone that's usually out in the forefront, where you feel like FOMO, like fear of missing out, like, oh, I need to be out there. What was going through your mind at this point?
I think we're having a crazy storm here in Washington. We're having a Midwest storm in Washington, D.C. tonight. There's like trees.
It might be just washing all away. Today
was right?
a hopeful day,
Exactly.
It's easing, calming the streets, and
everyone's inside.
Yeah.
I think it was really hard, right? Because so much of this stuff that I love to cover is healthcare. But for me personally, I have lots of family members, including my parents, who were still working. And I know I am safest and I can create my best work when I'm not worried about all the other things in the air and all the other, I don't want to call it noise, but it was just a choice I had to make for my sanity, right? Also, McClatchy put restricted travel for everyone, so we couldn't travel anyway. But so I took that, and then I just took right now I just need to support my family because they have to go to work. My husband is a freelancer. He still needed to go to work. And it was just a time for me to really do a lot of self-reflecting and just know that people might call it the story of our lifetime, but I promise you in a couple of years, there's going to be another story of our lifetime. Right. And it was just important for me to stay put and to kind of know my place. every night before I went to bed, I wanted to, I was like totally conflicted.
Yeah.
But I also know I have really bad asthma, and like, it's just not, it's kind of crazy though, because now I'm like running out to the street. And like, what am I doing? But I just think once we
What's
start,
up?
Well, we have a
Hey!
special guest from the streets,
yeah,
which is this our originally planned guest, Evelyn Hockstein, who's also my co-host on Around the Lens, is coming straight from Washington D.C. Is
You
it
do not have
raining?
to put a
Is it
hat on.
crazy?
You're
And what is
fine.
Oh my
going on
God.
with you?
Yeah, yes, I'm sitting in my car. I wanted to come on at 7, but this just amazing protest was happening at the Lincoln Memorial. And then these crazy thunderstorms rolled in. So I ran to my car and I'm sitting in my car. And then I realized, oh my gosh, let me see if these guys are still there.
So tonight,
So,
how was
is that enough
tonight?
light? You can hear me in my car, see me in my
You're
car.
good. How was tonight different than the last several nights that you've been covering?
Well, it was, well, the last night was totally peaceful. So this had the same vibe. The military was gone. I didn't see them. The Lafayette Square had been reopened. So last night it was completely shut down with military vehicles that were blocking public road. They were farther, they were out like in the streets, and that wasn't DC police. So that had, each night had been escalating. So like first, you know, you were pushed back into the park, then you were pushed back to like the edge of the park, then this metal perimeter fence went up, then these trucks were there. So all of that was gone tonight. And so it was really refreshing. Like when I arrived on the scene, maybe around 6 o'clock, there was a jazz band playing and there were hundreds of people filling the streets, and it was a totally peaceful vibe. And then I heard people were going to be marching to the Lincoln Memorial, so I scooted down there. And I also wanted to check and make sure there was no National Guard there, and I didn't see any. And then hundreds and hundreds of protesters, they were already there sitting on the step. It was really surreal. Everybody was like sitting on the steps, well, not on the steps, but the flat area outside below the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, listening to speakers, waving flags, cheering. It was really beautiful, holding signs. And then these hundreds of marchers also joined them from the White House. And more speeches. It was lovely. The sun was going down, and then the thunderstorms just started to roll in. So I bolted and smiled. Yeah, hi. Sorry.
We have a reporter that actually is reporting that the 82nd Airborne is actually on its way home now. So they were outside of at Andrews, I think, or outside DC. But it sounds like they're now on their way home. Which is...
So now we have breaking news on Open Talk, which you never thought would happen.
Yeah, right. So I wish I really wanted to call in because it was so beautiful at the Lincoln Memorial, but it was just I couldn't.
We're going to
pictures.
reschedule you because I want to go into obviously you haven't been on Open Talk yet, and one of the great things about Open Talk is to really talk about where you came from, how you developed, and where you are now. And your work is absolutely incredible, and it needs to be shared. And I'm happy to tell everybody that you're happy that you were able to pop on tonight and say hi. And everybody has something to look forward to because we'll have you back on when you're not running around crazy and the world's not going.
Evelyn has been making some amazing work for the Washington Post. There has, I'll just say there hasn't been many women out there. There's been a handful, but the first few nights there wasn't that many, and so it was really nice to see a friendly face. And Evelyn, when we'd cross each other, or she jumped in my car at one point.
Oh my God, gassed you? Are you kidding?
Yeah, she might have gassed me in my car, but it's okay, guys, don't worry. But you've just been creating some incredibly historic images, and it just makes me really proud.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
There's reporting, and then there's the art of reporting and crafting a photo. And well, I'm so honored to have all three of you on tonight. Because you're kick-ass women, and I love seeing women being successful in this industry because it's a hard industry, and supporting each other and also giving back so freely. So thank you all for doing that. But your images capture beautiful composition, light, emotion, and those aren't usually things you find all combined in one photo. And there are a few photographers that understand how to capture that in one photo. So I look forward to you and I kind of talking and breaking down all your work. We had talked earlier and just talked briefly about a slightly different feel of journalists on the streets now, and over the last year or so, that America had become listed as problematic on the list of problematic and dangerous places for journalists. Did you feel that when you were out in the early nights of the protests and looting and stuff like that? Did you feel targeted at all? Did you feel it was a different vibe? What was your personal experience because you were out there?
You know, initially I really felt okay. I felt the crowd. I was really happy. The crowd. I wasn't getting any stress or just, you know, people were really into the media, it seemed like, in the crowd, or wanted us to be there even if they weren't into us. But I wasn't getting pushback, which I've often gotten at protests, like, you know, don't take our photo. And I don't know, there are small like groups of people that don't like having their images taken, like Antifa, but I wasn't, or people just under stress or duress, or it's just a common theme that I feel sometimes these days at protests. And I often worry about the crowd, and I didn't get that at all. There was a little bit of an incident yesterday, which I can get to, but overall, I would say that was great. And as far as the police, I felt fine until I saw that video of those Australian journalists getting.
I was talking about that earlier, and you just clearly see that punch to the camera, which was so unwarranted.
Because I was right up there. I mean, look, when those cops are saying move, move, move with their shields and their batons, it's really scary. And you have to move. And I feel like if I didn't, I may have, but if you show that you're moving, or it's clear that you're press, I sort of feel like they're doing that intimidating. It's their training. Yeah. And if I am moving, I didn't think they were really going to crack me over the head. I'm more worried, really, I think sometimes about getting trampled or tripping, but that was how I felt. And I think I felt like I was identifiable as press. But then when I saw that, I just thought, okay, you know, anytime this could happen. And that really changed my attitude. I did think I was shot at quite a bit with those pepper pellets, as Jessica can attest to, because I was like covered in this
the white dust and
dust. Yeah. And I didn't, yeah, it was pretty bad. So I do feel that I was being targeted, and, you know, because I guess all the photographers would go up when protesters were approaching the police and take their picture. So I'm sure they felt like they had to push us back as well. But you clearly feel like you're directly being, and it hurts, you know, as long as they weren't shooting in my eye. You know, you could get really hurt, obviously, getting shot in the face. And I do have a lot of
one reporter did lose an eye.
Right. And I think different police forces shoot different things. I don't know.
Obviously, that was a rubber bullet, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in DC, I have not really, I mean, I think we often all group rubber bullets together. I think it's important to understand what's being used just for accuracy and all of that. So what I've seen are these pepper pellets. I have seen some larger rubber things, but I'm not exactly sure what to call those. I guess they're like rubber bullets, more like hockey pucks. I don't know how they work.
The ones that I have seen, and the ones the one I grabbed off the street was a 68 caliber impact and pepper spray. I don't know if it's actually a rubber bullet, but it's made of hard plastic, and it's a 68 caliber. It's very big, and when they do hit you, they do explode pepper spray on them.
Oh wow, yeah. Those they're like paint pellets.
They're hard, yeah. They're really hard.
Yeah. It hurts. I mean, I have really bad welt. Like I did not feel good at all. And I was really actually worried about my eyes. But I have probably 4 or 5 welts. No, it doesn't feel good. They work. They definitely
do their job.
Yeah. I saw a girl yesterday actually who was hit in the face with one, and that was really terrible. So, you know.
Do you feel like you're intentionally being targeted, or you're just more like in the wrong place, wrong time? Like, it's a matter of you're standing between protesters and the police?
You know, it's a really tough call. I mean, when you see them shooting those pepper pellets and they're shooting at you, do you think, oh, are they targeting me because I'm a journalist, or are they just targeting me because I'm on this line and I'm really not just standing there for fun? I'm taking a picture of somebody that they're trying to move back. So that's a hard question. I mean, it's curious that like my cameras were all covered. Like in fact, one of my lenses got messed up because it got hit with a pepper pellet. And you saw my pouch, Jessica. Like I feel like my equipment was hit quite a bit. You know, if I have one camera in my hand and another's hanging at my hip, my hip was where I was getting like all the action. So I don't know if that's just
Yeah, no, it's
You know,
I had trouble answering the question as well, which is
Yeah.
why I threw it to you, because it's like a
Yeah.
catch-22.
Yeah.
right. I
So
don't know. I do.
uh,
Yeah, if I'm standing next to somebody, they're going to push me back. So sure, they're shooting at me. But are they
you
specifically
you have
targeting
shot in
people?
places and conflicts and situations all around the world. How does this compare that it's on U.S. soil, and how does this one feel if you compare it to other places you've been? I mean, you don't expect it in your backyard, and how is this one for you personally?
Sorry, I got distracted. Because I've got a file. You're asking me. I've covered you. Sorry, just repeat the question. You said I've covered
Yeah,
a lot
no.
of
So I was saying
conflicts. How does
you've
it
covered a
feel?
lot of
Yeah.
traumatic, very heavy and graphic scenes and stuff like that,
Right.
and different kind of environments. What does this one feel like? That
Yeah.
it's you're looking at the White House as the backdrop. How does this kind of feel for you as a journalist?
Yeah, I think yesterday and the day before, or the day when they pushed the protesters out for Trump to go to the church, were really the most painful, because I was looking at a scene that did not look like the United States of America. It looked like these other countries that I had covered, like a sort of a tyrannical regime with a very strong military presence protecting the person. Oh my gosh, there's lightning everywhere. Protecting the person in. Yeah, you can hear that. Oh my gosh. Okay. Protecting the person in power, and it really felt undemocratic, I would say. I mean, our democratic process was going on, and it was wonderful to be with all these protesters. But the symbolism, it wasn't even symbolism, it was real. The sheer show of force and military force, and not just Metropolitan Police Department saying, hey, these are protesters and we're going to be there, on the perimeter, or we're even going to maybe control things, or keep things in line. But this was the military, set a different tone that was very similar to things I'd photographed in countries in conflict. So the other thing is, I truly think, I mean, it's heartbreaking, honestly, the rage, the anger, the distress, the pain, the frustration that all of these people are feeling, and coming out day after day after day after day after day, like we're on day 7 here in DC, and it started earlier in other places, really shows how traumatized people are in this country and how broken our system is. And the fact that this is going on day 7 and there's very little leadership coming to heal this nation, or messages of healing from, certain parts of our government, is it's really painful. So it's always hardest when it's in your own backyard. And I think, I don't know. I think we're at a real crossroads, and it's
So
been
for all of
painful.
you,
Yeah.
I mean, life seems to align its way in certain fashion, and you look at what's going on in the world right now. If we hadn't had COVID and people, social distancing, do you feel like now suddenly these protests are because it was the perfect time of, like, everybody was, the pot boiled over, everybody was angry, everybody wanted to get out, and this was a way to, because you guys are making a choice, like, COVID's not gone, but it's sort of like been put on this pause because this huge historical event is happening, and people around the world are saying, so how are you kind of grasping, like, oh, I'm going to ignore the COVID for a minute, but not really ignore it, but I'm going to go out and cover this, but not really, and then go back to, like, what is going on in your mind that, like, there's so many different huge things happening at once. It's like, you expect, like, all right, cue the aliens. What's next? It's like, it's like, what could possibly happen next? And there will be a next, because track record shows, like, every time we go, oh, this has never been seen before, or this is, we've never, had this before. It just seems like it's happening more frequently every day. That, that 500-year storm is happening every year. That, that the breaking down of politics, everything. It's like, this is a time, like, you must be, as journalists, like, overwhelmed. What's going on with you guys on this?
Evelyn, are you filing right now? Because
Yeah.
I'm super impressed with you for your multitasking. This is real journalism, everyone. You're in your car, there's a rainstorm, you're probably soaking wet, and you're just desperate to get those images on the way.
I'm gonna probably have to jump in a second because I'm kind of late. But
no problem. We thank you.
The thing is, what you're saying about COVID, I couldn't miss this, but I tell you, it started Friday, I think was the first night I covered this, and all of those months of self-quarantine were over in a flash.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden, I was in hundreds of people, and people are taking off their masks and speaking, and it's like every rule is broken. And then by the next day, when tear gas started happening, and there's just people are coughing and throwing up, and there's just bodily fluids being spread around everywhere. This is going to be really, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I mean, I would think if I've been told to stay home for the past 2.5 months, and now all these crowds are out, like, it's going to spread. And who is it going to affect? African-American communities who are already affected by this. So I'm really worried about that. I'm worried about myself, but I think I just stopped worrying because I'm covering it and I've been in it. And I mean, I've got my mask and I use hand sanitizer, but I feel like I can't not cover it. I will say though, because of COVID, perhaps these protests are lasting longer because people don't necessarily have jobs to go back to. There is really, nothing is really reopened here in DC.
Do you think it's slowing down or just getting started?
The protests?
Yeah.
I think more and more people are coming out each day. It's amazing. And is that, so I'm going to say maybe they're just getting
Started.
They're going to keep going. I don't know. Tomorrow, I think they're going to keep going. It's really astonishing and maybe shocking and sad. And maybe we have to really understand. I mean, maybe this, it shows like the depth of problems with racism in this country. So
they're calling for 1 million people to come to Washington on Saturday. So I think it's going to increasingly build. I also think these protesters have hella stamina because they are marching and walking all across the city nonstop. I know the text chain I was on was like, they should start offering transportation because I think one day I walked 10 miles or something. It's been crazy. I would say, and I would agree with Evelyn, I think it's just getting started, or we're really in the thick of it. We're like, this is the moment I think where real, a movement is actually building. As long as things stay peaceful and more people are coming out because it's peaceful, I think the Black Lives Matter movement is actually we're seeing it unfold in real time.
So here's the twist. It's so crazy now. What could possibly be the October surprise?
I just simply can't.
The October surprise in presidential elections. There's always some big, huge thing that comes out in October.
That's right. Oh my goodness.
It's interesting.
This whole year has been an October surprise.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw this meme today and it made me laugh because everyone's like, can we have a redo on 2020 or can 2020 be over with? And there was a response that was like, maybe 2020 was what we needed. Maybe 2020 was the year that we all needed to be uncomfortable so that we could learn from it. And I kind of thought about that for a minute and I was like, maybe.
Okay, so I'm going to quote this. Somebody wrote to me today because I put out some information, and Jacob Maskovich wrote to me and said, I'm so confused. How many, because I was talking about deadlines, and he was like, are there more grant deadlines that I didn't know about? And I said, no, I was just talking about deadlines that we're all facing right now. Anyway, and we went back and forth, and the how are you has been, you talk about the stuff that you need to talk about, and then you pause and you're like, wait, how are you doing? Which I think is so beautiful that we're all starting to recognize that we need to check in a little bit more with each other, with photojournalists, accepting the fact that, this is going to cause PTSD to some people. This is going to create situations that will cause PTSD later. But, he said, how are you doing this week? And I said, I honestly, Momenta is just trying our hardest to be supportive of our industry and our colleagues and our Momenta family in any way that we can, and making sure that, they're safe and protected. And he wrote back the best quote, which is, I hope the future of photojournalism marks this point as a time as a pivot towards empathy, change, intersectional understanding, and nuance. And I was so touched by that. And this kid is 21 years old. This happened. And the same thing that happened additionally today was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Erin Hooley of the Chicago Tribune. She's this incredibly talented photographer. And she was unfortunately assaulted and her cameras were stolen this week as she was doing live coverage. And she had just taken a photo of a young lady who is in college at Howard, and she was on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, and her name is Lexi Pitter. And I liked Erin's quote, and Momenta had reached out to Erin to ask her, like, what can we do to help you in any way that you need? And she very beautifully said, just share my story, talk to management, and subscribe to your paper. But I think the thing that struck me so much is I liked Erin's picture. This young lady who's the subject friended me on Facebook. And then she wrote to me to say, I see that you're a part of the media, and I just wanted to reach out to you because, and this is her direct quote, during this time, it's really important that the media accurately represents this movement. If you have any questions or want to know any way you can help, please don't hesitate to call me. This child is probably 18 years old, and those two are showing more maturity in this discussion than people my age that I've talked to recently, who are just raging and not listening and not opening their ears and their hearts to the nuance and the intersectional understanding that Jacob was talking about. And we bag on those young kids all the time, but we should be learning from them. They are the heart of this movement, and they're going to be the future of photojournalism. And if we can start embracing inclusivity of their opinions as well as the old dogs like us, and I think we're at a really beautiful turning point. And Jessica, I love that quote, because I think it's right. I think this is the time. This is when we start re-examining all of that. And it doesn't mean that anyone's the enemy. There's no, just because you don't support one movement or another, because you don't say something on Facebook the right way, it doesn't mean that you're like the enemy of the free press and the people and the movements and all that. It just means like we're talking now, and we need to start listening. And this movement is going to make people listen. And hopefully the violent instigators who don't have anything to do with future development and change will be ignored, because those people don't speak for the rest of the movement. The movement is about change and positivity.
Yeah, I think this just opens our eyes to, like, there can be many positive movements all going in the same direction, right? Like I see a lot of things about you're either for this or against it. That's not, I don't think that's what people are saying, right? Like, and I don't think that's the answer. There can be, this is like the United States of America. You can have so many movements, and you could like all of them just the same. So I that's really powerful.
Yeah,
that somebody said the other day,
Sorry, I can maybe get back on after I file. I need my phone too.
no worries.
Not a problem. We're rounding up. We're going to do another episode with you. So we're going to have you on. Thank you so much for being our reporter on the street tonight and giving us an update. It was I'm so glad that you were able to come in. And
I looked much better at 7 o'clock before I got
You look great.
Evelyn, you always look gorgeous.
You look like
absurd.
a badass. You're a total badass.
appearance.
And she's
We lost her.
So just quickly,
that is like the worst way to. Anyway, another was like criticizing my and everything about me, and I was like, "What? You're here for a protest for justice? Come on, lady." So, all right.
We'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much. So it's very different, because most of the photographers I talk about are commercial photographers, or wedding photographers, or journalists are slightly different. Where do you think that COVID is changing your industry, and what's the future like for journalist photographers? Because we're not sure what we're coming back to, as going back to sets, to movie sets, to to working in studios, to working weddings. Like, it's very kind of a different world. We're not sure what we're coming back to. As reporting the news, they're going to continue to report the news. So I mean, it's just how do you feel? And I'm asking you because I don't know. How do you feel, or if it's changing on your side?
From my perspective, which is, outside of a direct relationship with a newspaper, but, in terms of documentary coverage and extended projects and things like that, I think COVID has taught us, it should have taught the industry in America, that journalists are essential workers. And the unfortunate situation, and this is something, Jessica touched on earlier when she was talking about the layoffs, is we allowed these media corporations to consolidate, conglomerate, and then, create massive profits with layoffs and, just all of the greed and avarice and the things that, we shouldn't be allowing into the fourth estate. And it created this environment where small papers started to die, small radio stations started to disappear for gigantic, what is it, Qualcomm or whatever the huge network is of radio stations that they bought up, and then they closed down the other ones. And we're at this point where people need to recognize the value and to not listen to pundits and people who have their own agenda by saying that fake news means all news is fake and we should just, hate all of the journalists, when in actuality, we should be saying these are vital services and we wouldn't know what was happening in the world without them. And that's where I think the conversation.
I want to add on to that. Here, I will add on to not only you essential services, but you are the fifth check and balance of the government. I think you are crucial to keeping them honest and crucial to. But now that you have a leader that is trying to discredit the media and say fake media and use it to only when he wants it to, how do you battle back on everybody that can just so flippantly say fake media? How frustrating can that be? Is it's just like you can be as legit as you want to be and show every scientific point that this is a fact, and someone just dismisses it. Oh, fake media. That must just rip you apart to hear that.
I would say it does rip me apart, but I think it also there's an opportunity for important conversation, which is whenever there are trolls on my Facebook, I generally don't respond, but I respond privately. And I think it's important to have conversations. There is a difference between CNN and Fox News and the Frederick News Tribune, right? Those three things are very different, and it's important for people to understand that. I think during COVID, we were reminded when you needed information, where did you go? And if your local newspaper isn't there, CNN's not going to tell you who's dying in your community. Either is Fox News, right? The major broadcast networks, including and I love the New York Times and I love the Washington Post. I love those big newspapers, but I couldn't go to the Washington Post to find out what was happening in my parents' community in Northwest Indiana. I had to subscribe to my parents' local paper. I don't even live there, and I subscribe. And I think all I can tell people is it is important to subscribe to your local paper, to read your local information, because you're not going to get it anywhere else. And that is going to be, and I often say, that's going to be the most fact-checked information that you'll find anywhere, because there are newspaper editors and executive editors and managing editors and reporters who are committed to ethics and journalism. And that regardless of how broadcast media has changed over the past 25 years, even more so probably in the past 5-6 years, the local news is steadfast, and it has not changed. And you will find factual,
except that it's under financial attack.
Yeah, that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
It hasn't changed, and where everyone is strapped for cash, and we're not going to survive without people who subscribe. The cool thing at McClatchy is we've done some public fundraising similar to an NPR, and people have donated thousands of dollars, right? Not only are subscribing, they're saying, $10 a month isn't a big deal. We'll give you even more money, right? People will pay for responsible journalism, and they'll pay for good journalism. I think that's what we're finding is I think a lot of these really small local papers have decimated their staffs, and so their product also isn't as beautiful as it used to be, or isn't thick as it used to be. There's not as much content as there used to be. And I think if we can start making the product better, people will come back. They'll come back to those trusted news sources, because I think COVID reminded how important it is.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more important than your local media that allows you to do this. And somebody just commented, I will not call you out by name, on the chat that said there's no local news reporting today. And I don't think that's true, actually. I think that pessimism can kill our industry for sure, because if we don't start listening and talking to each other about what needs to be done at the local level, not just the national level, and we can't just, like what you're saying, Jessica, not lump people in with the New York Times and, you know, the Bend Bulletin, like our newspaper here in town. It's not the same thing. It's the same type of job, but that's kind of like saying that a local firefighter is the same thing as a hot shot that, you know, jumps into wildfires. Like it's different. There's different gear, there's different understanding, there's a different purpose for it and a different need for it. And you need both, but they need to be accepted as something that is essential.
So this brings us to
Travis.
us at the point where normally we go about an hour and 18 minutes with these. Now this has been my longest episode, and last week was my longest episode too, which was I had to split into 2 parts. I could go on and on with you guys, but I want to wrap it up with some questions here and then our speed round. And one of the things I like to ask is through your travels in life, it can be from your parent, a mentor, or something like that. It can be photography related or just anything. What is something that you take with you that you want to share that really is, you know, that piece of advice that you personally repeat to yourself all the time and remind yourself of, but when you want to give advice, that's the one big kind of piece of advice you would give to someone?
Jessica.
Sorry,
I'm passing the buck.
It can be a simple one. It can be something like, you know, it's like a little simple one that my dad used to say is, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, listen more than you speak. And you know, it's like, I'm like, wow, that was pretty deep. You know, it's like, yeah, you know, you should listen a lot more. If we listen to people more than we spoke, then sometimes, hey.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold on before I answer this question. I'm reading the panel thing, and I want the person that's talking about local news in the Chicago area to reach out to me because I want to talk to them. So find me on Facebook, because we could talk for an hour about what he's sharing in the chat. So I think my aunt always says this to me, and I've taken it with me everywhere. Is be still. She always tells me to be still, which is, I think, super crucial in, it's like super crucial during this time is when you're still, I think you listen. And I think when you're still, you watch. And I think those 2 things provide great perspective.
That's beautiful.
How about you, Jamie?
So I read a lot, and I read this one trilogy every year. It's fantasy trilogy, Travis. And there's a talking dog in it, and the talking dog as in one of the moments when the like heroine of the story is really conflicted, and she says to him, and she is talking, and the other male character says, you know, like, I want to do something, I want to go on this quest essentially, but I'm afraid. And the dog says, it's always better to be doing. And I use that a lot in Momenta when I talk about photograph. It's always better to photograph doing, somebody doing something. But I think in my own personal philosophy, like it's always better to be doing. It's always better to be trying. And we should all move forward to like try.
There's one that I always repeat. It was one of my very early guests on Open Talk, and Megan Allen, who's an amazing photographer and a friend. This one just keeps ringing to me. It's like, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you should do is create and not consume, because we always want to turn on the TV or reach for our cell phone. It's like, do something other than consuming. Just, you know, whether it's, you know, go fix a nice breakfast or go out and watch the sun, or, you know, or create something. It's like, and I'm like, wow, you know what? Have I adopted it? No, I still reach for the cell phone in the morning, but I'm still, it's playing in my head constantly. The next question before we go to speed round is, and I think this is easier because a lot of weeks were darker weeks up into this one. And I think that there was a lot of things that we saw this week. The question is what have you seen in the last 7 days that really kind of gave you hope for the future, or made you smile, or just made you go,
Well, I don't know, Jess, your dog every day, my dog every day. I think that's, both of us can definitely say that, but.
You know, this is more of like a personal thing instead of like a public thing, is like, it's been, and remarkably cheesy. It's been really awesome to experience and work with my husband and I don't get to work together that often, and we have been in some really intense moments. Like we've been like shouted at each other this week, and we just have we've had conversations now this week about politics and race and our relationship that just I don't think we would have ever had before. And I, you know, even when we're on the streets, like it's been really it's been really hopeful. And we have these 3 neighbor boys that are really awesome, and they're adopted, and they have 2 dads, and every day, like when we go when we're getting ready for work, they say, Mr. Tassos, Miss Jessica, you know, where are you going? And you know, we're going to work today, and they go, you know, be safe, and they think we're fighting the movement for them, right? And so that when I look at those boys, that has given Tasso and I hope, because they
On cue.
they've just been seeing the world through their eyes, and seeing their encouragement has been really great.
Oh, I like that.
Well, I could say that there are 16 people who've been on this talk the entire time that we've been here, and those people definitely are making me feel like what we're doing is good. I'll say that there are two photographers during COVID who I've just loved watching their work, and it's been wonderful. Like Impact Lens is run by a young woman whose name is Pavni, and you can follow her on Instagram. And she's not a professional photographer, but she's been going out and photographing an ongoing project on people of color. And she changed her focus to do people of color who are still working through COVID, and how so it's, you know, so vastly, you know, impacted those people because they are essential workers. And she's just been going out and meeting all of these strangers and becoming a citizen journalist in the best way possible. And then I would say Syed, who is not on this anymore, he was on here before, but Syed Yasim is a really great photographer as well. And he came from the wedding and portraiture industry, and, you know, really high-end fashion, all of that. And he's just been so motivated during COVID to go out and document the people in his local community who are making masks and, you know, delivering supplies and doing all these acts of kindness. And the two of them, they represent all that is wonderful and beautiful in the world, and they're putting it out there on social media. But it's not just to get kudos, it's to make their subjects get kudos. And I think that really proves what social media should be. It's not this place where if you just shout the loudest, it'll make you look important. It's the place where you put your subjects out there and like get their mission and vision out there. And I think the two of them are just doing such lovely work on their own time. And that's really, it's motivating.
I love it. So this is our speed round. So I'll ask one question, and just the top of your head, quick answer. So I will start with Jamie, and then we'll go to Jessica. And so the first question is, what is your guilty pleasure TV show you're embarrassed to say that you watch?
Well, like that I'm embarrassed about?
For me, it's Vanderpump Rules. Okay, I actually just, you know, I said it. I'm embarrassed, but it's true.
Okay, I really like, it's a super cheesy like ABC family show that the lead is, I found out, a Scientologist, but it's called Good Witch, and it's this like totally pure wholesome show that every once in a while when the world just seems really crappy, I'll just turn it on because it's all about like family values, and you know, she's a witch.
Jessica?
Very cavalier-y.
Okay, all right.
But I used to cover, to be fair, like I used to cover Jay Cutler when he was the Bears, and I think he's such a dud. And so I just had
I am so disappointed in both of you.
I know.
Well, no, Vanderpump's over now. The season just ended, so now I'm on to Below Deck.
This is what I'm missing with cable, I guess.
Guilty pleasures. All right, what is the one holiday that does not exist that you would create?
Oh, that's a really hard question.
For me, I'd make election day a national holiday across the board. Everybody had it off
Oh, that's good.
across the board.
Second.
Yep, I'll third that.
All right. I see. I shouldn't give
Oh wait,
answers.
no, hold on. I'll give you one. I think that every human in the world should be able to take their birthday off of work with pay.
Okay.
Actually, I would also say I think between Memorial Day and Labor Day, no one should have to work on Fridays.
All right. Toilet paper
Let's
over.
do all three of these.
Toilet paper over or under?
Over. No, under. Mine's under, actually.
What? We've never had an under before.
It depends
You're
on
one of those people.
It depends on who puts it on the
Unacceptable.
roll. It depends on who
Unacceptable.
puts it on the roll.
Have you ever sent a text message to the wrong person? And how bad was it?
Oh, bad.
Oh, bad.
I had a woman boss once, and I thought I was texting my girlfriend, and let's just say that's what I did by accident.
Oops.
And no pictures or anything. It was just a text. She laughed about it. I laughed about it. It was all good, but it was like, oh boy.
Oh, that's funny. I once told my boss I loved him when I hung up the phone on accident. Like, it's like a goodbye, like, talk to you later, goodbye, I love you. And it was awkward.
I type really fast and autocorrect. I'll usually sign off with thanks so much. And if I type it too fast, every once in a while, autocorrect will make it thank you smooch. And I almost sent that to a client one time because I didn't proofread.
Okay.
Smooch.
If animals could talk, which breed of animal would be the rudest?
Cats.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, I got hippos from someone last week.
I'm going to say
I thought that was
dolphins because
pretty
they're
good.
super smart and I bet they could be really sarcastic.
If you could be anything other than a photographer and choose any job, what would it be?
Trauma surgeon.
OBGYN.
All right. Final question. And this is a deep one, and it can be it sounds like the shallowest of questions, but it's like, a chef learning to cook. If you can't cook an egg, then, he can't be a chef. What is photography to you?
A universal medium of expression and storytelling.
No, that's a generic answer. What is it to you?
Oh, to me?
Yeah. What is photography personally to you?
Okay, Jessica, you go. I got to think.
For me, it's like my sixth sense, I think, really. Like, I feel like it's life for me.
Then you're doing the right thing.
I think it's a pathway to memory in my world. Like, we study so many famous pictures for so long that it's almost like watching an old movie to sometimes flip through like old picture books that I've looked at a million times and to see, amazing Eugene Smith pictures or Dorothea Lange or, something like that. And then it's like, it triggers so many things that you wouldn't associate with. It's not even a photo you took, it's like, oh yeah, when I see Jessica's like Haiti pictures, I think like, oh yeah, I remember these things. So it's almost like a scent.
Mary Calvert once told me a good picture combines your senses so that not only can you see it, you can hear it and you can smell it. And that's why for me, I think it's like a sixth sense. Like a good picture, you should be able to smell what it smells.
I love that. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for giving me my longest open talk yet, and we went all over the place and had a journey together, and we could go on for hours and hours more, but I want to thank you so much. Any last bits of anything you want to leave with the people, and where can people find you?
You can find me at on Facebook or on Instagram or on my email at jessica@jessicakiselniak.com. Should I spell it?
Yeah.
So it's Jessica KOSCIELNIAK.com, or you can find me at PhotoJessCos. That's on Instagram and Twitter, or through Jamie Rose, because I'm friends with her and she's a lot easier to remember.
Not through Jamie Rose. Jamie, how about you?
You can find us at Momenta on Twitter, at Momenta Workshops on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm on Facebook I just reached my friend limit today with Lexi Bitter, and then I'm also on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
And I would say that if I could leave a sign off, it would be that this is the time when everyone is grieving, and that's a time when everyone's raw. And if we can all just be a little bit kinder to each other, a little bit more sensitive, and we can open our ears, or what did your aunt say to you?
Be still.
No, Travis.
Oh, me. It was, you have two ears and one mouth. Listen more than you speak.
I think that should be everyone's motto for the next month. This
Or
is
at
the
least
time to
use your
listen.
ears a little more than your mouth, which I think is the good adaptation of that. Yeah, guys, thank you so much. And this
Thank
is
you.
another episode of Open Talk. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
You guys, that was amazing.
Now I'll stop
Jessica, I'm
recording
so
right
proud
after
of
that.
you.
It still says it's live on YouTube. Is that right?
Oh,
Yeah,
fantastic.
I'm killing it. I'm killing it now.